it's nice to impart this to the kids though, like that, or also even my parents and everybody who doesn't really doesn't imagine painting being a career.
Right.
That, oh, painting is a job. So my daughter believes that painting is a job.
Oh, wow.
Which is awesome. Like that's going to save her so much time if she wants to become an artist one day, if she does. But also if she doesn't, for her to understand that that's just an actual like person or role that contributes to society and to the world and to history. So that's nice. That is nice.
Yeah.
That feels really good.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello, everyone. My name is Navpreet Singh. You may know me as Nav the Poet. This is the Rooted in Sikhi podcast, where I have conversations with fellow Sikhs to discuss the role our Sikhi plays in navigating the world. I am so excited for today's guest. Allow me to introduce her. Rupy C is an Oakland-based painter dissecting historical and contemporary displacement narratives around identity, belonging, and gender. As a descendant of refugees and a first-generation immigrant, Rupy's family narrative of movement, loss, and resilience is foundational to her creative inquiries. Her work engages in strict practice of traditional materials and methodology associated with Indian miniature painting as she continues to add contemporary images and characters to a centuries-old visual language. Rupy's work has been recently highlighted through an exhibition at the De Young Museum in San Francisco in 2020, and at Headland Center for the Arts in 2021. Rupy's solo shows include the Triton Museum of Art, Santa Clara from March to May 2022, and at the Jessica Silverman Gallery, San Francisco, April to June 2022. Rupy, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
Hi, thank you for having me. This is a natural step in our friendship, I think. I'm doing well. It's great to start off a Monday with you.
All right, let's jump right into the conversation. So to start, I just want you to share, what has your journey with Sikhi been like?
Oh my God,
I know.
that's a very, very deep question.
I know.
My journey with Sikhi I think it's been one of immense love, of course, because I was introduced to Sikhi through the women in the family, and also the very, very loving men that I've been brought up by. So it's been definitely one of love and one of service, and not service in the sense of doing seva, but I think just being useful, just being a useful person in this world, and to be considerate of others. So it's kind of, that's been the beginning of my relationship with Sikhi. It was not necessarily through a participation in Bani. That was more of my own initiative that I took later in life. But it was more about, in the beginning, more about the essence of what type of a person you are. And I think it evolved, of course, majorly when I became incorporated into my work and how I was navigating this exploration into Sikhi through work, specifically through Bani and calligraphy. And at that point, I think it became a relationship of a teacher and student, because I would look into Gurbani as a visit to a teacher and be like, what can I learn today? And right. what will inspire me today? And so it was kind of that relationship. And then now it's become anything, because the nature of the world, and it's ridiculously difficult, especially I think recently being a parent and just seeing how much can happen to kids, and how much anger I have as a parent because of the lack of resources for our kids and the lack of safety for our kids because of that. And I think because just generally the nature of the world right now, which is ridiculously difficult for many people, I've come to rely on Sikhi as that, as a parachute, but also as a raft, to kind of keep me going, to just so I don't drown. I think it's a safety ring, I would say. been using a lot of water in my work recently. So if this is, this ocean that's forever shifting, it's my safety ring that I know I have.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, I know I do, I find it that way. I view it that way too. And everybody's journey is complex, intricate. But I think ultimately we land on that kind of, like you said, safety net of Sikhi being that, guide and that reassurance in life.
Yeah, not a safety net though. I think a safety ring.
Oh, okay.
A safety net, I think, is like something you can fall back on. But with a safety ring, it's literally like it's going to be the last thing that saves you from drowning.
Okay.
I just think the intensity of just the way the world feels for me right now. I think as an artist, you're just so in touch with what the world is doing because emotionally you have to create based on that. For me, at least, that's how it is. That the truth cannot come from, within me. It has to come from what the truth is. It's what's happening outside. And it is overwhelmingly traumatic for artists. And I think in that moment, in that very dark, alone moment in isolation that artists usually are in, Sikhi is a safety ring for me. And it's what I can actually still hold on to while I even take those deep plunges. So yeah, it's very, very important in that way. Because I know I'll be pulled out to safety. So yeah, I think what I mean to say, it's very urgent. It's, I wish it wasn't. I wish it was a little bit lighter of a relationship. Yeah.
It's understandable though, as you said, especially with the times we live in. But you mentioned your art and like how you're using water. Could you talk a little bit about your journey into your art? Like, I know you weren't always an artist, were you?
No, I mean, I was, but I wasn't, of course, thinking of pursuing art professionally until about 10 years ago. And before that, I pursued my education in biology and public health. But when I made the shift to art, which I was reluctant to, of course, make, but it was also something, and I tend to be I tend to be a person who likes to take chances and just say, okay, if we're going to try something out, it's all right. Let's just try it out. If you fail, you fail. So I'm not scared of failure. So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm just going to give it a try for 1 year, a few years, and see how it goes. And also how I like it and how I relate to it. But I think it went far enough where I was able to find the styles I really wanted to adopt in my work. So whether it was a traditional Indian painting style or doing calligraphy in Gurmukhi primarily, I was able to find the passion, the drive, and also the surrender to those techniques and methodologies. And I think that's been what the entire practice has come to be built on. Just having this eagerness to learn more about those things, but then also create more. And of course, the world always keeps giving you material and keeps, triggering those subjects that need to be explored further in art, in painting. Yeah. I hope I answered the question. Do I remember the question correctly?
Yeah, it was your journey into art.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's such a long journey too now at this point. I think,
sure.
Like we were talking about before, I wish I could remember everything. But that's why it's great to have loved ones who remember more about you sometimes and witness your life. And I remember more about their life versus my own. But I think the journey has been, of course, it was never like I was never sold on the idea of a struggling artist. I just never understood that.
Right.
So for me, the journey was never about, like, I never felt a moment of helplessness or lack of confidence that is this going to work or is this not going to work. It was nothing like that ever. It's more about, am I going to find things that I really want to say in my work? It was more from that perspective. That was a struggle, and not the idea of an artist that is more capitalistic and more rooted in just a Western tradition, Western style of what an artist is, because if you look at traditional styles of what an artist is in, at least within the traditional Indian sense or traditional Indo-Persian sense too, the artist is, definitely someone who observes the world very closely, but at the same time creates as a part of their way of living. The way of living is what is the art, and not necessarily them having an 8-hour 9 to 5 type of thing going. So I think in that way, the way I approach art, or in the way I approach the role of an artist, it's a way of life. It's not necessarily a job, even though sometimes I wish I thought of it as a job so I could walk away. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, similar to Sikhi, it's a really unique personal relationship with art that we all have as a fellow artist. I can speak like that. It's but what's interesting for me and you, I find, is that we blend the two. And having seen your work, it's evident to me that like your pieces are influenced by your artwork is influenced by Sikhi. I mean, I have a painting of the Mool Mantar, which for those who don't know is the first composition of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the Sikh Holy Scripture, and the present eternal and living Guru. And so I know the more I write about Sikhi, the stronger my connection becomes with my faith. Was the blending of Sikhi and your art a natural process? And do you feel like that blending helps you grow both as an artist and as a Sikh?
I think the blending was more an effort when it came to calligraphy.
Okay.
Because if I'm fluent in Punjabi and I can read and write it, but Gurmukhi, or reading Gurbani and writing Gurbani, it's a different process and a whole altogether different art form, I would say. So blending that into my calligraphy practice took effort, but also took a process of value making. For example, if I'm writing Gurbani, what are the surroundings? How am I setting myself up for it? How am I approaching it? How am I extracting from it? And how am I, using it? Like, what is that relationship? Because it's not as straightforward as, writing down a piece of poetry from somebody else, somebody random. With Gurbani, it's because it is living Guru, you navigate that very, very carefully and to say respectful is still so trivializing it. It's
right.
It's literally like, how would I interact with a living Guru, and how much can you not extract? Like, being extractive was something I was trying to be careful about not doing. So that was one thing. But I think within the paintings that I do, especially now, the idea for me, whether it's, a painting that's about climate change, climate breakdown, or it's a painting about displacement, I think the kind of emotions that I can pull out of like, for example, in displacement, there is this entire breakdown of, separation and then longing for that land, but also being separated from it. And that idea of what separation feels like, or the emotions that are attached to separation, comes so often also in Gurbani, that there's a layer of understanding that separation that comes for me directly from Gurbani. Because there are so many shabads and there's so much about it. So
the second part of the question was, do you feel like that blending has helped you grow both as an artist and as a Sikh?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's no hesitation in that. I think this is a thing with me. I felt that the blending has been present always in the work.
Mm-hmm.
However, because as an artist, it takes time to develop your voice, that eventually, when you've been doing it for a while and when you've worked on developing your voice, you figure out where that blending is showing up more, right? And you figure out what influences are showing up where, and where exactly you can trace it back to. Like, for example, for me, in most of my work, my idea of death and the idea of the ephemeral nature of life, it's rooted in Sulok Mahila Nova. just always is. And it always will remain that way, because my understanding of death and life being short-lived comes from that. Or just being, or I think imagining life as a short-lived thing, it comes from my understanding of Sulok Mehla Nova, right? So of course, when I create anything that has to do with, whether it's our life cycles being influenced by climate change, or us influencing climate change and the life cycles of other beings on this planet, it's the beginning of all that entire conversation comes from Sulok Mehla Nova, where, my own lifetime is being questioned, and my purpose in that lifetime is being questioned and talked about, right? Or or the human life, right? So in that way, blending has always been there, but slowly now I've learned to recognize it and be like, okay, this is exactly coming from this bit about how I relate and how I connect to Sikhi. And I think even, for example, the themes of displacement, if I'm approaching them, I can approach such a traumatic and heavy topic because there is an understanding of, of a certain amount of optimism that life has to continue and to be lived fully. And that is coming from Chardi Kala, and just knowing that that's just the basic. That's just how you imagine life to be. And that's just what you think of instantly something traumatic goes on. And that's what you think of instantly when the world is falling apart. So I think that kind of layer, or that cushion between me and the subject matter, which happens to be very traumatic, that creates a cushion for me. And I know I can continually explore it because there is a foundational understanding of life still being worth, living, and life still being worth living optimistically and living in a way that we derive meaning from it and we derive joy from it, and not necessarily about giving up. And there's still a certain amount of invincibility, right, that comes with Chardi Kala. So in that way, I think it's there. I don't often infuse it in. It just comes in because what I'm infusing in is who I am.
Sure.
And who I am is obviously what my life has been, right? And yeah. So I wish it was I like it better this way, because I think it had to be the other way, where I'm just sitting there and be like, well, in this work, I'm going to try to put in, this aspect of being a Sikh, and I think it's harder that way, because you don't necessarily create truthfully at that point. You're staging yourself at that point, which is great, I think, if it's for actors who are staging themselves, although you're performers who are staging themselves. But with painters, I think, or for myself specifically, if I'm not telling the truth, the work is not going to connect with anyone. And then I always create for that connection. And you have to create truthfully, and truthfully, you have to tell the truth that is about you, that Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely relate. I mean, I would probably say the same thing, is I don't seek out writing about Sikhi, but it's so much a part of me that's what I end up writing about. Someone had asked me, like, if I hate at all, and then this poem came from the question. And when I looked at the poem, I was like, oh, wow, this is just like all Sikhi. But it wasn't like I said, oh, I'm writing from a Sikh perspective. It was just, this is how I think and feel because of Sikhi. It's just infused in me, not in like my brain, consciously. So I totally get it.
I think it does ask there is one problem that becomes or not problem, but I guess it is a problem. It's a problem of labeling, right? It's that when we are, as artists, when we are creating something, because we are obviously very much our value-based creating is based in our upbringing, in our living as a Sikh. And yet, if we're talking about something that doesn't happen to be a loudly Sikh thing, or a generally known or generally seen before Sikh thing, then the question is asked, is this Sikh art? Is this a Sikh artist? And I believe that's such a disservice to this evolution of Sikh artists that is happening, where we are creating, like, I mean, even if it comes to abortion and to pro-life, pro-choice, we're looking at all of these things as people, and we happen to also be Sikhs, and we happen to also, like, I happen to be a woman, happen to be a Sikh, and if I'm creating work about that, and if it's not, doesn't have, the Sikh symbols that are known more popularly, whether of thought or physical symbols, then is that Sikh art still? But then isn't it important for Sikh artists today to be relevant to their times, because that's what's influencing their life, right. Like, I need to create work about I need to create work about reproductive rights, and I could still also create work about Kalukara. But for me, maybe as a woman who's given birth right now, at this point, reproductive rights seem to be something I also need to speak on.
Right.
And how is it is that Sikh art still? And if I'm creating work about Kalukara, is that Sikh art still? So it's a really interesting question that, even I get asked recently, and I'm just like, let's ask that question to everybody, because is it dependent on the audience? And is it dependent on the artist? Like, who does that question depend on? And then how do you actually, like, what's your criteria of teasing that out? Like, how do you separate someone's Sikh identity from them as an artist?
Yeah.
For certain paintings, but not for others. Like, I find that really interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely noticed that, because I spend a lot of time talking on social media about Sikhi, and those videos do really well. And then if I talk about movies or some other interest I have, not as well. And I'm wondering, is my only purpose to serve as a Sikh and, like, about Sikhi? Like, can't I be a Sikh who also likes these other, topics and talks about other subjects? Or must I only, like, will I only be considered of value if I talk about Sikhi alone? And it's frustrating because I'm a whole human being. Like, I have other interests and desires, right. But
especially when, as a Sikh, we are actually encouraged to talk about everything that is unjust,
right?
Or, that is just not, that's unjust, sorry, that is not going so well in this world. And we are encouraged to talk about it. So we do, of course.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, I think the thing is then, that's why it's very important to recognize that as a maker, as a creator of any type, what we create and what we make is very different from what the packaging or the PR or the marketing or the audience response is. And if you want to get influence, then it's one thing, but those two things are very separate.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you had just happened to mention also, being a mother, and a big theme of your work is gender. And when I visited and saw your show at the Trident Museum of Art, you had this one little exhibit, which was a set of suitcases, which I really just found impactful. And it was 5 of them, I believe, right? And each labeled with a woman from your family, going from great-grandmother to daughter, right? Okay, I got that all right. And so what was it about that, and I guess the idea of motherhood, that compels you to speak about it, and gender to speak about in your art?
You're asking all these questions that take me an hour to unpack. I think if I was to shorten this at all, it would be, so I think in general, motherhood is discussed very, very, in a very narrow way. Within, at least definitely within, like, the Punjabi and also South Asian context. It's like supposed to be the joy of all things, and you're supposed to really want to be a mother, and your life is not complete without being one. And of course, I didn't grow up with this. I was not told by anybody, luckily, that, hey, you need to have kids now, whatever it is. But I also never felt that it was going to be my identity marker in a very big way. Like, so I would just always find it so suffocating that women were that motherhood was being addressed in such a lopsided way, firstly,
Mm.
but then also womanhood was being glorified only when it came to her being a mother. And that what about the rest of what womanhood is? I mean, there's so much. So you're saying that women who don't become mothers are not worthy of glory, all of that. So that was one, of course, I always create work when I get angry about things, so that obviously made me angry. And this was before having kids. But then even while I had kids, the type of mother I am is, my kids know this as much as they can know at, 1.5-year-old and 4-year-old age, is that my work is very important to me. What I do in my studio is very, very important to me. And even with my 4-year-old, I have a very open conversation about this, that I want to go work right now, and that I just want you to know this, and then I'll be back, and that, this is the reason I'm going to work. And it's just a good conversation to have. And it's good to also hear about their questions, about what they want to know about what mothers are doing at this point. But I also feel that motherhood in my work is, like, if I was to say one huge aspect of it that's not addressed popularly, is the isolation of motherhood. The amount of, and this is coming from the moment a mother is declaring that she's pregnant, it's so much of our society's resources, whether it's cultural, whether it's medical, so much of it is geared towards the survival of the child and the medical or the physical survival of the mother, but not necessarily the mental and emotional survival of the mother.
Right.
And even though we label ourselves to be a society that, we celebrate we celebrate births of both boy and girl, we celebrate, whether the baby is born with all 10 fingers and toes, or the baby has disabilities, whatever it is, that we are okay with that, we're celebrating that. And that we celebrate the historical mother figures we have, However, we don't necessarily even care about the mothers who are running the world, our society. We are imparting roles to them, like, okay, yeah, you're supposed to give birth, you're supposed to teach Sikhi to them, you're supposed to make sure that they are good humans, you're supposed to make sure that they, grow up to become something and become something useful to the world. Now, but what about the society's responsibilities towards mothers? Where do you see that? Where is any thought being put into that? Even though, and the difference between my generation and the generation before has been that my generation is even more isolated, because we are also heavily involved in our careers. Right. We don't necessarily have the chance to gather even with our own mothers and our masis. And we don't not all of us, many of us, yes, that's great. Or I would say most of us, maybe, hopefully, I don't know what the stat is on this, but I think women of my generation are so heavily involved in their careers that we're not even getting that woman to woman support as often, because we are not around our mothers and grandmothers so much. Women are working, like, we're working as much as the men in the family and even more, but at the same time, we're not getting that women to women support that we need, just because there's only 24 hours in a day. So I think that isolation that becomes rooted in a mother's experience now has to be uncovered. And it's not necessarily like an isolation where it's a hopelessness or a helplessness. Mothers are one of the strongest, figures in our world, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that they don't require resources, that they don't. And in general, like, the narrative around motherhood, well, we need to do a lot of work on that. It's so much more than pregnancy shoots, and so much more than baby showers, and so much more than even requesting for maternity leave to be long enough. It's so much more, because mothering is a full-time job for a lifetime, and support is needed at all times. And I think in the work that I create, I'm just trying to show different aspects of what that job is that nobody's talking about.
Mm.
Like I feel like sometimes when we glorify things less, we actually start seeing the practicality of it.
Right.
And if motherhood was glorified a little bit less, glorify the resilience of mothers, but at the same time, please look at our practical challenges. And, I happen to be a mother who's working full time, but also with a lot of support. I have childcare for my kids and I have unpaid childcare as well, with my parents being here as much as they can to help me out. But all of these things I'm trying to basically uncover in the work or discuss, because many times I think artists are the ones who can introduce new ideas more easily for conversation. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to make sure I do that. But I can talk about this for an hour. So
yeah,
as you can see.
Well, I've seen you firsthand balance being an artist and a mother. So it's definitely, like, obviously I witnessed my own mom, but it's different from when you're just seeing someone else do it. And like, especially a newborn child, she was fairly young at the time. So it was really just like, I don't know what the right word is, but like witnessing it was just, it was a lot. I guess that's the best way to put it. And I was just,
you were like, wow, they're doing so much in this 1 minute.
Yeah. I was just someone witnessing it. I can only imagine what doing it and managing it all is, like. So,
and also, I mean, it's a choice, right? It's not that I didn't make the choice to be a mother, but also then if I made the choice to not be one, I mean, there would be other things that you would be like, okay, that's cool. Rupy's doing that. That's cool too. You know what I mean? But yeah, you're right.
I think you're cool regardless, but
let's just establish that.
Yeah.
I think that, the labor of women, whether they're a mom or not, whether they're, whatever we say, whether they're high achievers or not, whether they're working full-time, part-time, whatever it is, let's just talk about the labor of women more, because we start laboring when we're little girls. It starts that early for us. And let's just talk about that a little bit, right? And it's not about feeling sorry for us or anything like that. It's just about, let's just talk about it, because that's trauma. That is, baggage we're all holding. Like, that the installation you referred to earlier, it was titled Carry On Baggage, because there is a baggage of motherhood and womanhood that women are carrying from generation to the next. And it tends to be a very silent baggage because nobody speaks of it, yet the heaviness of it just increases with each generation. Right. And then there's the world that adds the other stuff on top of it. So I'm just hoping that some of this processing for me is reducing the baggage for myself, but also for many other women who are not artists, because artists still have the luxury, we get to think about all this. That's our job. We get to explore all of these difficult topics. And those who are not getting that luxury through work can see the work and feel seen or feel addressed, feel that part of it addressed, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, continuing this part, because I had seen this Instagram post you had shared on Vaisakhi, the Sikh holiday, for those who don't know. And I'll share the image, but the caption that you put was, "My Sikh foremothers taught me to take up space as a woman. If you're not for women like them, like me, then get out of the way." This is a powerful statement, as I would expect no less from you. And there's like a long lineage of incredible Sikh women, many of them mothers, in Sikh history and our present day and our own personal histories. What influence have these women had on you? And is there anyone in particular who you reflect on more, or who maybe you strive to embody?
I've been very careful about idealizing any of them, to be honest, because I think the one thing I've always accepted is that whether it's women or men, we all come with flaws, but we all also come with these really inspiring traits. Right. So I've never looked at any of them and been like, I want to be like her. Never have, because I think I've just always been careful and wary of the concept of idealizing humans. Sure. I think, that's with that said, for me, I think I have just wanted to strive towards a certain level of resilience and a certain level of sahaj, which is this acceptance in a very sweet, patient way of life. Just sahaj. Sahaj means to slowly accept, or slowly not accept even. It means to have patience, right? But sahaj, in the way I'm using it, is about how you look at life. And I don't know if sahaj is a Sikh principle, or is it more of a character trait of the Sikh women that I have been lucky to be around. But that specific trait, which, is about not getting aggressive and telling people to get out of the way. But, that's just who I am. And I have to say, get out of the way. But for them, it was maybe about, let's take up space, and let's give space also. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that concept comes from Sahaj for me, that concept of Sahaj. But specifically, I think, so I've, both my grandmothers have gone through the partition of India, 1947 partition of India. My own mom has been through, migration. And I would just say, and also my great grandmother who, would be part of morchas during the, during, I think it was the 1950s. She would be part of these revolutionary morchas that she would be in the front of, and there's photos. But when she was alive, I could never really talk to her about that. So I think it's these women that I know of, that I've physically seen, that I usually derive inspiration from. And I think it's more about strength to know that they have existed and they have done this thing called life, and done it in such a graceful way that, okay, I've got that in my genetic makeup, that when I'm walking into a gallery, and if I'm feeling out of place and I'm feeling like an imposter, this is the lineage that I can depend on. And be like, that's all right, I've got this, or this is who I am. And this is nothing compared to the discomfort of a different situation that they've been in. So I think that's, standing in their shoes sometimes is very helpful to give me strength, because in the work I do, I don't have many role models. That, or not role models, but it's more about, I don't have elders. Right. There's, in the South Asian artists or the Sikh artists or the Punjabi artist scene, I don't have any elders that have access to, who I can talk to about, legacy and life or whatever it is as an artist. So for me, the elders that I know of are the mothers in my life. And so I look to them. Yeah. But for me, it's, I think, these women that I've lived and seen in flesh that I derive inspiration from. And they're all of them devout Sikhs, and, some of them even having a very different understanding of Sikhi. Like, they were all Sikh in a very different way. Right. They were not this homogenous, Sikh that we all think everybody is, but no, not really. Everybody practices in their own way, actually. And, there was, like, one of my grandmothers was big on Such. And I just remember how that was part of our life and living with her always. And one of my other grandmothers was always about, starting your day off with Gurbani every single morning. And my own grandfather, even until he was 91, his routine evolved around Nitnem and just right. That entire schedule, and right. just being yelled at for waking up at 6 a.m. for me, as a kid. So I believe also, just how strongly they believed in what they believed in, right. is definitely a principle or way of, or value that I take into my life. Mm-hmm. That if you believe in somebody somebody is not in the right, basically, that you say it. And that's it's okay to believe in what you believe in. You don't have to be PC about it. You don't have to be. And that's why I'm not. And I think I haven't gotten into trouble so far about it. But that's when I do I'm kind of very straightforward about things that I don't believe in and the ones I do believe in.
Right. I think your point about the way even your family, everybody practices Sikhi also is influenced by the time, right? Because as you had mentioned, you have some elders who are at the front lines of these morchas, these protests, these rallies, and similar. I learned a couple of years ago, my pardadaji, my great grandfather, was he protested and went to jail for India's independence, and so against the British, and I think that also affects how we process and navigate Sikhi, right? You look at even the gurus. You can talk about from Guru Arjan Dev Ji to then Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. Like there's a shift in Sikhi because of what's going on at the time, and I think that's important to acknowledge. And also just everybody's different, and they learn and they internalize principles differently.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a really interesting point that you mentioned.
I think it's activation, right? The for me, the root of being a Sikh is to be activated.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be an active participant, but also an activated participant
Right.
in society and community. You're not you, and I think that's just great because we don't have the choice of being dormant.
Yeah.
And we don't take that choice. And I think that's, and like even when you're talking about your great grandfather, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't, like, that's the one thing, right? There's no romantic notion of what a Sikh is. It's not about someone who wakes up, and for me at least, it's not about someone who's heavily involved in Gurbani only. It's someone who's heavily involved in all parts of their life and is heavily activated.
Right.
Right? Is the person who will get into trouble for speaking the truth.
Yeah.
But even whether it's women or men, and that's the other thing, the narrative of what the Sikh, or who an inspiring Sikh is so male focused.
Yes.
That's like, I'm like, but most of us are actually growing up with women as our role models.
Mm-hmm.
It's the women who are driving that Sikhi focus in life, and they are so activated.
Yeah. No, I mean, the more I talked about Sikhi online and everything, and I'd want to focus on specific historical figures, and I realized my list of men to women was just so drastically like imbalanced.
Drastically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and not intentionally, of course. I mean, but that's just the case, I think, in the world for most things. It's the list tends to be the actual people doing things tend to be very similar, or there'll be more women,
right?
And then the list tends to be very heavily just men,
right.
As if the women just never existed, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing that I care about is that, hey, if it's stories of women, even if it's my own story as an artist, if you don't speak it, it's not recorded. If it's not recorded, it's not going to make it to the list. And it's not that I have an ambition to make it to a list. It's just that there is a girl someday who's going to need that list to be longer.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree, because important. I've come across some weird comments by people where I was talking about, they tried to basically
you've come across a lot of weird comments.
I know, but like specifically in regards to like Sikh men and women, and they were trying to basically put gender roles on men and women, and I was like, what are you talking about? There's like, Mata Pago or My Pago, and they're like, that's an exception. I was like, what do you mean that's an exception? That's one of so many women. Like, I don't know. It's not wild to me. I'm well aware, especially now, of how ingrained that this kind of mentality is in the community and society as a whole. But just when people say things out loud, sometimes I'm just baffled at how
they got. Did you just say that?
Yeah, exactly. It's not what they said, because I get the world we live in, but I'm just like, you really just said that. It's astounding.
Well, you've also, I mean, the thing is that both of us have been lucky to be raised in these, I think, in these, slightly less toxic patriarchal circles, maybe. And that's why we are also open to the fact that there is an existence and there's a way of doing things that's just not so heavily patriarchal and that's not so heavily gendered as well, right? Yeah. That's the other thing. And I think it comes from maybe somewhere seeing the possibility of acts of, courage or whatever you want to say, just being non-gendered.
Yeah.
However, I think there is in between, there was such a push for recognizing more Sikh women for things, but then still using a criteria of what courage or what glory or what resilience means in a very male context. In that way, then you're already still making the mistake of gendering that act. Right. Whereas the resilience of women, I mean, just hearing stories about partition from the women, my grandmother's generation, from the family, when they were walking through and making that journey from one side of the border to the next, their courage is, and literally at night going out to the local pins that they would stop at on the way and finding atta to make rotiyan for as many people as possible. That is an act of courage. That is an act of nourishment. There's, and if you're, for just imagining yourself in that spot, if you're a bunch of women going, whereas you're seeing, women be raped and women be totally used in the most wrong ways, and yet you're going out and you're like, no, but everybody's got to eat, right?
Yeah.
So when do we recognize, or when do we become sensitive to the acts of courage and the acts of resilience and the acts of or important acts, right, in a very non-gendered way, like in general? Like, can't just courage just be courage?
Yeah.
Does it really take a woman holding a sword, yielding a sword, to call her courageous? Or what about, like, since the time she's a girl and she's navigating this heavily toxic environment, that takes courage.
Yeah.
So, and that's every day for women. For many women, living every minute of the day is courage. But we don't see, we've made courage such a male thing.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the other, I get, even for example, public speaking, when I'm in front of a crowd speaking in public, it's such a, especially if it's in the Punjabi Sikh context.
Right.
It doesn't happen so often that we have women who are younger in front of the Sangat speaking. Right. Taking that space up.
Yeah.
Right. It is happening more and more. But the thing is, it's not even about it happening more and more. It's about recognizing that this woman is taking up space and it deserves and has equal amount of knowledge, if not more, and it's a very complicated, of course, it's a very complicated topic, but
of course,
I don't know. It's essentially about not, like, a non-gendered way of looking at life.
Yeah. I mean,
that would be great. But then if you are being gendered, do it for the right reasons, right? So, yeah. And I feel like that's when this idea of acceptance of who everybody is, within Sikhi, where if you're fighting for anybody and everybody who's undergoing oppression, then we have to have this, we can't really have these filters, right? Whether I'm going to help one gender over the other, or I'm going to help one class over the other. There's nothing like that. And what transition do we have to make to actually live like that? If the principles are like that, then how do we actually live them?
That's
one baby step at a time.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation to itself.
And we're not perfect. We're still working on that too. I'm not saying that you and I have figured it out. We're working on it too, but it's very important to ask these questions, even to ourselves.
No, absolutely. I agree. So my next question is, I'm not married yet. I don't have kids, but as I get older, I think about how I'll raise my kids and what role Sikhi will play in their lives. So as a mother, has your relationship with Sikhi evolved since having kids?
I think of course it's evolved, because then I have to now think about what knowledge of Sikhi and how am I imparting to my kids. Also having to now creatively think about packaging Sikhi and this idea of Sikhi, right? Like, how do you introduce that to a baby? So in that way, it's allowing me certain lighter moments with Sikhi, where if you're trying to explain it to a 4-year-old, how do you do it, you know? And whether it's bringing in references from the TV content they watch, right, and all of that. So it's a quite, I think it's becoming slightly fun, but also for me, I think I'm trying to stay very close to how I was introduced to Sikhi instead of what the format is in general right now. I'm definitely not about like, oh, you are Sikh because you are not this. Like I'm generally against that.
Sure.
I think the way I was raised with it and the way it was introduced to me was through a general notion of love. You know, and I know it's very simple to say, but like if you love singing, let's sing some Gurbani, you know, and I have a kid who loves singing. Or if you love, like one of my kids loves to listen to music, like instrumental music. So if you're listening, so let's put on some Gurbani, let's notice these sounds. So I'm doing it in that way so far. I don't know if it's working. I don't know any of that. That's not, you know, my job is to impart the knowledge of whatever I know.
Right.
How it gets absorbed or doesn't is, at the end of the day, I think is going to just show itself. But definitely not about creating any type of sense that you are Sikh because you are not that. That I'm definitely staying away from that, because I think that's just a very scary situation.
Right.
Yeah. So that's it. It's kind of fun right now. It's also kind of, you know, it's interesting to relearn Sikhi from the perspective of a 4-year-old or 1.5-year-old twins who will watch Kirtan in the morning and, you know, point out the water in the sarova of the Basab and be focused on that. But then one of them will kind of sway to the Kirtan, you know, and just to see that happen and to let that be, like, that's it. I think it's about not exercising control over their understanding of it so far. It's about, let's see how they connect and which aspect do they connect to. Right. Like, for example, one of my 4-year-olds connects to the way that you sit in the Gurdwara. That you sit, you sit cross-legged. Like that way of sitting is her connection also to the space. Because I have my connections to Sikhi, right? Or like, you know what I call them entry points, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, Kirtan was the entry point, or listening to it, but also reciting it, right? Or also, or Prashad, of course, is an entry point for every kid. But, you know, but it's like, I'm curious to see what connects them to the space, to the principles, and then launching from there instead of me imposing on them. Definitely staying away from that. And then also for them to relate to the Sikhi of their family members. That why does Nanu do this at certain parts of the day? Or why does Nani make prashad with her head covered? Like, you know, all of these things, and having them notice those things. Because it's a way of life first, right? Before they understand the history and the deeper reasons. That's how I've figured it out so far. Yeah. And very recently, so I don't know how it's going.
It's a process, and I definitely agree with you about the entry points. Like for me, it was poetry, and then recognizing that Gurbani is poetry, and, you know, from my own writing to then I kind of view myself as carrying on the legacy, right? Because our gurus were poets, and here I am also a poet, which is why it's always funny when people question me pursuing art, but that's another conversation.
Everybody questions everybody who pursues art.
I know,
like, but why did you do that to yourself?
But when it's a Sikh who I know is like really into Sikhi and like devout and like loves our gurus because they're poets and philosophers, and then I'm like, hey, and they're like, no, but you have to do an actual career. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But it's also funny what you mentioned about like seeing Sikhi being learned from the perspective of a child, because I mean, a lot of my audiences are a wide range of ages, but because they're so unfamiliar, it's kind of a similar experience for me, because they're so curious, and we were like raised where like, oh, you keep your hair and you do this, and it's just commonplace for us that we don't sometimes question some of the more technicalities or logistics, but then people are like, oh, so if you value hair, like what about bald people? And I'm like, I've never thought about that, but like, no, that's fine. That's just like the natural process. But it's so interesting to see how they think and process those ideas.
Like the little things that they're seeing that we generally are not aware of, right? Or we're not thinking about even. Yeah, I think that in that way it's fun, right? To see it from a person's perspective who doesn't know yet about the ins and outs of everything. And I mean, we don't either. I don't either, but yeah,
I don't.
It is fun. I think it makes the entire process of introducing Sikhi fun, right? Like for you, I think that's how it becomes fun also. And we don't get much fun out of life. I would say, I mean, I don't have a life because I have work and I have my 3 children, but I just think it's so great when you get to play, because it's part of it's your identity, right? When identity is unpackaged and unraveled in a fun way, how cool is that?
Yeah. It's fascinating, some of the questions I get, honestly.
I know, and you share them. I love reading that list of questions you get, because I think it's some of us might have those questions too.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, that's the best thing for me about Sikhi is that you are like, you have to accept the fact that you don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
It's just a search to make sure you keep looking for them.
Yeah.
And that you stay active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had seen some of your interviews and you had mentioned that Sikh Punjabi women are encouraged to embrace their identity, but may not necessarily be shown the same support for certain ambitions or careers or aspirations. So what, you can call it advice or just thoughts, would you give to Sikh women about navigating the faith, the community, and society as a whole?
You know, I've looked back at a lot of my life and as an artist and seen like what helped me the most to navigate all of these spaces in a fearless way. And I think if it is anything, so since I was a girl, we were just never taught to fear anybody. So whether it was the older men in the house or the younger men in the house or my father or the older women, you know, any of these people where age became, you know, a factor that some people be like, no, but you should do exactly what you're told because this is your dadaji, or this is your nanaji, or this is your dadi, this is your nani, or this is your father or your mother, right? So we were never told that, no, you cannot question us. And I think because since an early age, I'm very comfortable questioning whether it's someone my grandfather's age or it's someone who is much younger than me, that the fact that I don't have fear of questioning, it has allowed me to be in spaces, whether it's very Sikh spaces, whether it's Punjabi spaces, whether it's just the world in general, because what tends to be is that most of the power brokers are either older men or older women, you know, like you have to be able to speak freely with them. So that's like, I think that would be like a technical recommendation I have. Like if you're raising girls, make them comfortable questioning anybody.
Right.
You know, like my daughter is asking, I mean, this is also like have some stranger dangers, please, but she's okay like going up to a random person to be like, how are you doing today? You know, and this is a very trivial example, but I think it starts very early that we don't limit the interaction our kids have and how they interact.
Right.
Men and women, I would say, I mean, boys and girls, but especially girls. And the other thing that I think I would recommend is the pursuit of excellence. Like, just don't compromise on that. Pursuit of excellence does not mean pursuit of A's and, you know, like honors. That is different. That is pursuit of like, you know, really good work ethic, a really good study ethic. That's great. That's awesome too. But I think, and this is, I think I'm speaking to more women who are my age or younger professionals who are just setting on their path to do what they're going to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
But pursuit of excellence is also not a pursuit of money. Pursuit of excellence is also not a pursuit of fame.
Mm-hmm.
Pursuit of excellence is purely pursuit of excellence, which means that you are going to be the best at what you do.
Mm.
And it's as simple as that. Like it's actually the easiest thing to understand. Like if you are not the best at what you're doing, or like the best that you can be with given the resources you have, that's the other thing we have to recognize, that not all the women are given the same resources, you know.
Right.
Like I come from a huge amount of privilege
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do what I do. But if you are still, I think, but this is when I think we change our lives as people. If you pursue excellence, it's such a simple thought, but I mean, I just see no other way.
Yeah, I like the simplicity of it. I think it makes the statement really nicely, like, of what to do, and I think it's great advice or thoughts. So
it's a really good bumper sticker. Just pursue excellence.
So as a fellow artist, I know that it's difficult, if not impossible, to choose a favorite piece. So that's not what I'm going to ask you. What I want to ask, but like there are certain lines I've written or concepts I've used to shape some pieces that I think are just like awesome. And I'm wondering if anybody recognizes them. They may not, but I think they're awesome. So like, is there a specific element of any of your pieces that carries maybe personal significance, or just has like resonates with you on a personal level? Could be a fine detail, a technique, whatever it is.
I mean, I think there's more than one, but I think even to this day, the fact that I'm creating work using traditional techniques, like it still blows my mind, because I'm like, okay, this is great. You know, like the fact that I can still use them, even if I'm in the contemporary art world, like the mainstream contemporary art world, the fact that me using traditional techniques is not a detriment in any way. And the fact that I'm still using them in a very passionate way, that is one that I get very happy about. You know, that's one. And I think also the training that I put my time in, I get very happy about that, but also I'm very proud of the fact that I prioritize training continuously, no matter how many paintings I make. But like recently, it's been about, you know, like you've seen the work also recently, but it's been about giving the center stage to brown female bodies, and to have those pieces then be, you know, in mainstream museums. And you know, and I can't even discuss all the acquisitions right now, but it's about, you know, knowing that a mainstream or institution is taking those works for what their essence is, right, and not necessarily for, you know, the idea of tokenism, or like a brown artist creating works, so let's buy it from her, whatever it is. Like it's about the content, you know, it's about what is depicted in there. And it has been these women who are brown women. Right. And I think that has been something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and to have done it, and to have it and it's, you know, to see it appreciated, and appreciated in a way that it leads to acquisitions, but also leads to impact on the community. Like all my friends who are creators who've seen the show, who are women, have told me that they feel seen. You know, the show, I mean, the solo show that had all of these works with women as central figures. So somewhere, like the fact that there have been more brown women as a central character in my work, I'm like, that's good. Like I did end up doing that. That's something I thought was actually like, you know, be so hard to do some time ago.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's seen the exhibit, you know, that was, I can say you succeeded. And like, I might have even told you, but I was telling so many people that it was just really cool to say, I have a friend who has an exhibit in a museum. Like it was a bragging point for me. Just
like I was bragging, I was like, I have a friend who's here to see my show from New York.
Yeah, it was great. Well,
Thank you.
this has been, yeah, of course. I'm always happy to support. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate the time. We're sorry, we're
Come
laughing
on.
because
We have so much more to talk about. Come on.
I could have prepared like 80 questions, but would just talk forever. But what do you have coming up, and like where can people find you, your work?
Thankfully, I'm a little bit like laying low right now, which I need to. But I have I think in August August will show the dance theater art production that I worked on. It'll be showing. It's called Broken Seeds Still Grow. That'll show in August here in the Bay Area. And I think right now I'm just hunkering down and I have to create more work for different shows, and people will just find out about them as they come up. The solos are done, and I think the solos exhausted me, but at the same time have given me more purpose to create work that I think speaks to the community even more. So I'll keep doing that. And yeah, what was your other question? What was the other part of the question?
Just social media, like where people can find
Oh,
you.
social media. Yeah. So you can see my work on my Instagram, which is Art by Rupy is the handle. That's RUPY. And you can also see it on my website at byrupy.com, which I don't update as often, but it does get updated like every 6 months. And in general, like I think if the other thing that I'm really heavily involved in as for more of a volunteer basis is this thing called the Immigrant Artist Network, where I, along with a collaborator, Jason Wyman, create space for immigrant artists, whoever they might be, and their comrades, so people who support immigrant artists and their narratives. And I think that space has been really amazing for me to invite people into, to be able to either speak about what they're going through as an artist, but also then learn as an artist as well. And I say that because I think a lot of people reach out to me and I'm not always able to, cater to their needs in that way. But this Immigrant Artist Network for me is one way that I can give back to anybody who is an artist and who's just starting or who's figuring things out, which I highly encourage for people to reach out to me through that for sure. Because that is where I put this time of mine that I value as a volunteer, and I put it there.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, Rupy, thank you so much again for taking part in this. I appreciate your time, your energy, and just you as a person. Thank you all for tuning in to the Rooted in Sikhi podcast. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.